I want to start with Mr. Reed Cowan's testimony because I've not been a member of this committee for the entire duration. And by the way, I'm very sorry for the threats to your family in the course of all this. No one should endure that. But when I did sit through Reed Cowan's testimony, and just so I'm clear, he obviously was a significant donor. But is it right also? I just want to get this right. He was a former member of the We Charity Advisory Board. Is that right?
Yes, we had an honorary advisory board about 15 years ago, and in an honorary capacity, we had him and others participate.
And what he told this committee, was it true?
As we shared in our opening remarks, Mr. Cowan, first of all, we're heartbroken about what happened 15 years ago. A plaque was changed. Very unfortunately, one of two plaques for a school that was built in Kenya. 4 schools in total were built. 2 had plaques and 1 was unfortunately changed. And we are looking into it. We actually created a board committee to find out what happened. We're taking this very seriously. We really would like to understand and to make sure that he has all the information on this topic. We were able to and apologize, but we've of course got much more to do.
What do you now make of the December article in Bloomberg where staff joked that We plaques should be made of Velcro because they were swapped so frequently? I know it was initially the response was that that's not happening. What do you make of staff saying that now?
We understand that 2 cases have been identified in that same village at the same time about 15 years ago, and we want to research it. We want to get to the bottom of it. It shouldn't have happened. We apologize for those 2 cases, and we're going to continue to look in case there's anyone else that this has happened to. And as context to give one thing that's sometimes, and I'm not saying this happened in this particular case, because again, it's 15 years ago. We're trying to figure out our records.
Well, rather than speculate as to how would this have happened, in the sense that who is responsible for moving these plaques?
It would have been in Kenya. It would have been a member of the Kenya team, theoretically. The thought that comes potentially to mind, and again, I'm not going to speculate about Mr. Cowan, but generally, is we have funding to build schools, but funding also comes in to provide teacher training, lunches for kids, vaccinations. The funding to actually run a school is exponentially more than the cost to build the school, as you can imagine. So sometimes multiple plaques are placed on a project because it takes multiple donors to run the project.
But why would a plaque ever be taken down, I guess, is the part I've tried to think it through, but I just can't really figure out the answer to that one.
I agree with you. It should never have happened. We made a mistake. So there is a mistake that was made in the organization involving that man's plaque. And one of those 2 plaques should not have been taken down. You're absolutely right. And that's why I called him and I apologized. We publicly apologized. And we know that that's something that we need to get to the bottom of.
But what is a member? So look, as I say, I haven't gone down the rabbit hole like some of my colleagues on this. I was a bit skeptical about the contract to begin with because I thought Canada Summer Jobs was the better place for it. But I didn't really go down the rabbit hole of who was ultimately to blame in all of this. But it does concern me when I look at, and I take your point, this can be a partisan place, but your staff aren't partisan. And so to have staff joke that We plaques should be made of Velcro, and then in the Fifth Estate, they spoke to more than a dozen former employees who had concerns that the organization was not always transparent with donors. What's a member of the public like me to make of this? Not partisan actors like Mr. Angus, who I happen to like, but staff and dozens of staff.
I had thousands and thousands of staff over time, and we're pleased that many of them loved their experience with the organization. And specifically on the Fifth Estate, they had one example of an individual that they said was confused on whether they had funded the entirety of a water project. And actually, it's subsequently being clarified that that individual was not confused. But unfortunately, that piece went in the public domain and has been repeated and repeated and repeated. And that creates real difficulty for us as an organization. In fact, that later, CBC put a piece on the air involving boreholes. And the donors that were featured on that, 8 of the donors signed an open letter, say they were misrepresented. That in fact, they were very clear and knew that they were funding the maintenance and the drilling the borehole. And so I'm happy to have this conversation with you. I know it's obviously out of the scope, and I appreciate that people have stayed within the scope of pandemic spending. But we as an organization, the money goes to help kids. We are transparent with our donors. We're not perfect. We make errors. We absolutely make errors, like Mr. Cowan's plaque. And we try to own those errors to the best of our ability and fix them when we can.
What's the name of the individual who would be?
That's time. Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith.